Hello and welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where we do history in a friendly, neighborly manner 24/7, 365, or 366 days a year. And we are back. Happy weekend to you all. It's 6:20 on the East Coast of the United States, and I am bringing you some friendly neighborhood history, answering all of your questions about history, social studies, and the like. We are joined with a background of Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. And yeah, we're here to do some history, to talk about history like we always do in a friendly, neighborly manner, answering all of your questions about history and social studies for the next hour or so. So, a very happy Friday to you all, and I hope you are all having a great beginning to your weekend. If you like history and social sciences and like the vibes that we have here at the channel, please consider liking and subscribing and becoming, or even becoming a member, and getting early access and bonus content, members-only lives, and things like that. For a short donation. But of course, becoming a friendly neighborhood historian, as I always say, is as easy as liking and subscribing. So doing that will take care of that, and we will be live for the next hour or so answering all of your questions about history and social studies and the like. A very happy Friday to all of you. So yeah, we will get started when people start putting questions, topics, questions, comments about different social sciences and different historical topics in the chat. We do these live streams every Friday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern, where we answer all of your questions. And then Sundays at 4 p.m. Eastern, you can vote on our upcoming topic, which will be a live stream lecture. Haven't been able to figure out a topic I'm going to do, so please vote here on YouTube. We did a wonderful lecture last week about the Renaissance, followed up by a Monday MLK Day lecture that I hope you all enjoyed. And I hope everybody has a really great weekend and spends it here with us at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Please follow us on social media at our Patreon, our Substack, and our Discord that my wonderful moderator Hars put in the channel. And please follow his YouTube channel where he does history and social study edits. So he's kind of an offshoot of us, our longtime moderator who's been with this channel for a while. We are coming up on a 2-year anniversary. We will, thank you, Virginia. I really like this microphone. It's kind of a 1930s, 40s pile microphone, kind of a retro style, and I think it sounds really good. I think my voice really works on it, so really appreciate that. Good to see you back as always. Sorry for lags in communication and whatnot with all of you. But yeah, follow Hars for more stuff about history and social studies. He's got some nice edits. We've been doing the live streams for about a year and a half, a little longer than a year and a half. And of course, we also have our Q&A, and we started with one Q&A, then we added a second Q&A, and then we added the live stream lectures on Sunday afternoons, which I really, really enjoy. And those usually are followed up by some pretty good Q&A themselves. And of course, we also have our short video content, which is produced every day, long form videos, which usually come out Mondays and Fridays if I can get to them. I've been very, very busy, but I'm trying my best. So thank you for your patience with me there. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where we do history in a friendly, neighborly manner. A happy Friday to all of you. Please like and subscribe and become a friendly neighborhood historian. I'm joined in the background with Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation, which became the law of the land on January 1st, 1863, officially freeing all of the slaves in the Confederacy, which was enforced whenever Union troops would arrive in a Confederate area and subsequently free all of the slaves. And of course, the last time this happened was on June 19th, 1865, which was the holiday in Texas, which is the basis for the Juneteenth holiday. So there's that. Our channel's coming up on 2 years. We celebrate our 2-year birthday on President's Day weekend, so a lot of fun stuff that's going to be happening for the channel will happen around that time. Please check out our video from last President's Day, where I say one good and one bad thing about each U.S. president. Hars, if you could put that video in the chat, I would really appreciate it. And if you have a topic, question, or comment about social studies or history, please drop it in the chat. Follow us on Discord for more discussions. You also have Patreon and Substack for my articles and other content. About James Polk, do you think Polk's intentions and efforts were based on his view of Jacksonianism? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, when did I first come on this channel? It was a year ago. We got Hars, who's been an excellent moderator. Harry came about the same time. Put the video where I've got one good and one bad thing about each presidency. It's one of my favorite and one of my most popular long-form videos. It's from February of 2025, I think. So please, yeah, put that up. Anyways, yeah, so what have we got? Questions, topics, comments, stuff we want to talk about with history and social sciences, like we do every Friday and Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and then Sundays for the live stream lecture. So we cover all types of history all around the world. 24/7, 365, or 366 days a year. So thank you for joining us. Let's see here. Should I keep the background? Should I change the background? I think Emancipation Proclamation is a pretty cool background. And yes, please check out that one good and bad thing about each president. Thank you for posting that. Does anyone have any questions that they would like me to answer? We'll be going for about an hour. Was the greenback the reason he was killed? Try to create U.S.-owned money? No, I don't buy any of the conspiracies about why Lincoln was killed. The reason, the co-conspirators, the conspiracy of John Wilkes Booth seems pretty straightforward. Lincoln did want to change the U.S. monetary system. The greenback wasn't as prominent of an issue as it would become later in the 19th century. And Lincoln was overseeing a country that was only partially industrialized. And in many ways, the Civil War is the battle of the industrialized North versus the unindustrialized provincial South. Has any president stopped midterm elections like Trump? No U.S. president has ever suspended an election, either midterm or regional or presidential. And what elections did Trump stop? What do you think about the boy they lied and said he was kidnapped by ICE? I mean, I don't want to talk about the political issues and climate. I think it's just getting too crazy for me to actually address. I do sometimes do daily news segments where I talk about the news in different areas of the world, and I cover it as objectively as possible. If you want me to talk about a political or religious topic, which are the two things you're never supposed to talk about apparently, I'm willing to do that, but I only give in-depth analysis on that for a super chat, so consider giving a super chat. Mac, it's good to see you. Was Lincoln a wrestler? Yes, Lincoln had an undefeated record as a wrestler. He was tall, he was lanky, but he was quick and he was strong. And Lincoln was also the rail splitter. That's one of the most famous paintings of Lincoln you've probably seen when he was a young man, literally with a log and an axe and wiping the sweat off of his brow. Lincoln was an impressive physical phenom, especially during his youth, and of course was extraordinarily tall. Will you be making homosexual hand party again this evening, like yesterday? Please, please, please. Nah, I'm good. I'm tired. What do you think about the ICE rioters who stormed into a church and harassed them during service? That was pretty crazy to see Don Lemon, of all people, there, which just kind of adds to my theory that the American media is not trustworthy whatsoever. Not that he's even part of the American media anymore. He's kind of his own independent journalist. But basically, one of the reasons I do a daily news segment, even though I'm a history channel, is because I don't trust the news. I don't believe the news is being delivered to you objectively. So it's something that I'm going to do. And yes, it is something that the KKK would have done, which I find kind of ironic. You're protesting intolerance and the mistreatment of people of color by storming into a church and interrupting its services. Fascists blame the media for lying. I'm not a fascist, but I do think the media lies. Thumbs up to you and yours. Yes, an honor on you and honor on your cow. What's this? But anyways, so that's a little bit of our friendly neighborhood history, typical banter. People will ask about politics and stuff like that. I don't like to get into it too much. Even I'll talk about geopolitics. I always try to bring back everything to what I think is the main issue, which is history. And I think actually if we did learn history, if we actually took history as seriously as history wants us to take it, as history kind of implores us to take it, as we study history, we realize that these lessons echo down the chambers of history and kind of implore us to really, really learn from them. I think it's really, really good. I think it would be really, really good. I think we could learn a lot of the social and geopolitical lessons that would be necessary for solving future issues. If you give a gift and you can go on a rant on how Grant destroyed the Ku Klux Klan, yeah, that'd be great. I love talking about that story. I'll do it almost without a gift, but a gift would be nice. Hars. Shout out Big Boy Ben and his fabulous nation founding beard. Big Boy Ben. Nation founding beard. Which beard are you talking about? Ben Franklin didn't have a beard. Why was there not a fourth Punic War? Carthage was destroyed for its salt. That's the third Punic War. It's basically this siege on Carthage in which the Romans basically finished the job that they had already started in the second Punic War and just leveled Carthage. Look behind you, bro. Why? Are you there, James? When did Ben Franklin ever have a beard? I mean, Martin Luther had a beard. That's probably pretty crazy for a lot of people who are used to this clean-cut Protestant reformer, but I don't know of any of the founding fathers having a beard. It was just not in vogue back in the late 18th century. Thank you for the 2 gifts. Hello, Blue Baron. Good to see you. What are your thoughts on the 1500s maps with Chicago on them, but named Chickasaw? My YouTube photo. Well, Chickasaw was the ancient Indian name for the settlement that became the basis for why it's called Chicago. Like many American cities, lakes, rivers, states, and territories and cities, it has a Native American name associated with a tribe that lived in that area. So, yeah. Anyways, get to the rant. Okay, so Ulysses S. Grant is the U.S. president in 1868. He's elected in 1868. A main reason of this is because African Americans in the South are getting their voting rights. Lincoln continues Republican dominance of the White House that starts with Lincoln and doesn't end until the mid-1880s, with the one exception being Andrew Johnson, the president he replaced. Grant is an extremely popular war general. He is seen in many ways as a second Lincoln, and he plans to finish the job of the radical Republicans in Congress and Reconstruction by basically continuing to destroy the old Southern way of life, establish opportunities economically and socially for African Americans, and basically break the spine of post-Confederate resistance by Southern whites who can maintain their racism despite losing the Civil War. So a offshoot of this, founded by Nathan Bedford Forrest, of this terrorism, had been known as the Ku Klux Klan. Now, I used to know the reason for it. I think it's an old Gaelic or Celtic term, but it basically refers to our own people. And it was an idea of segregation, of promoting segregation, but also violence and terrorism against blacks who were just trying to get on their feet after the end of slavery. Grant was able to send in the military and actually use the military to destroy the Ku Klux Klan and stop their operations, whether that was destroying black businesses, abusing black women, lynching black people, were both suspected of and not suspected of crimes, which is what lynching was back in the 19th century, and other things. Basically, the Klan was pretty much smashed in its first incarnation. Now, there were other incarnations of the Klan that would come later, but as long as the Union Army or the Federal Army remained present in the South during the 1870s, the Ku Klux Klan was sent into dormancy thanks to the efforts of Grant, who crushed them pretty mercilessly, even killing some of them. So that is how it worked. How do you feel about Will Durant's Story of Civilization books? Haven't read them, so I can't. So I don't remember Thomas Jefferson ever having a beard either, although maybe I've heard of it. I haven't seen a painting of it, so I would want to see a painting of that. But there you go. Horace gave a gift, so I was willing to go on a rant. If you want me to go in more depth on a particular topic, consider giving a gift or even a super chat. Anything you do helps the channel. There's no pressure whatsoever. Any topic or question or comment you bring up will get answered, except if it's obviously just ridiculous trolling by idiots on the internet. But we welcome them too. Please like and subscribe. I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody come on and start to troll, and then they actually end up falling in love with the channel and become a friendly neighborhood historian, which you can do by liking and subscribing. So anyways, okay, there are more questions here. Trump's an imbecile surrounded by imbeciles, supported by imbeciles. Yes, and he thinks you're ugly too. Is the Statue of Liberty a statue of Lucifer? No. It's the Lady Liberty. It is, I think it's an inspiration. I think it's the same basis for the Columbia statue from like Columbia Pictures of this woman carrying the torch of freedom. And of course, it's very French and it's very American. It's very much kind of seeing the way Franco-American relations have worked as kind of a symbiosis and a mutual respect because of the revolutions of the late 18th century, which the American Revolution caused the French Revolution, so there's something to that. Lincoln did not start the Civil War over slavery. That's actually... so this is a common argument made by people that Lincoln didn't want to free the slaves. Lincoln would have loved to free every slave he could have, but he didn't think that it would have happened. Just like the founding fathers, Lincoln believed that slavery was a part of the Southern economy and society, but it was actually outdated and would die out over time, and the Southerners would basically eventually realize that slavery wasn't working and get rid of slavery. He didn't understand how entrenched slavery was to their identity. So when the Civil War started, yes, it was to ostensibly bring the Confederate States back into the Union, but the only reason the Confederate States had left on their own and formed the CSA was because they believed Lincoln was going to take away their slaves, something Lincoln had not promised to do. All Lincoln wanted to do is ban slavery in any new territories, thinking that he could choke the institution out over time. Lincoln said if he could end the war and not only free some of the slaves, he would do that. So that is true, but it's only part of the picture. The entire Civil War was indeed about slavery. Buying into the idea that it was about states' rights or regional differences or economic differences, though all of those presuppose the real issue dogging the differences between the North and the South, and that was slavery by the time 1861 rolls around. Greetings. Great to see you, Shuriken. I'm not in my History Hefner smoking jacket, but I am in formal wear of this nice tie. I love this tie. Did they find children's skeletons under Ben Frank's house, the Hellfire Club? I've heard that rumor. I don't think they have. Are you a Trump supporter? I don't share my political or religious views on this channel. My job is to talk about history and social studies. I'll share my opinion about a historical topic, but I will talk about religion and politics only in a historical context and only usually with a super chat. What do you think the weirdest city is due to the geography it's on? Venice, the city that's disappearing, kind of is in a precarious position. Yeah, it's the light bearer. So is Trump a neo-imperialist? He definitely is a neo-imperialist. Look at the actions in Venezuela and now in Greenland. It's definitely very much America needs to have a big say in how the world works, and if that means gaining land, resources, and influence, then it will do whatever it can to produce more hegemony. He's really much a Theodore Roosevelt figure. Now, I'm not saying he's as good of a president or on the same wavelength as Theodore Roosevelt in any way, but I'm saying that he definitely has that speak softly and carry a big stick attitude. Who's your favorite president? Lincoln. I also think he's the best. Like and subscribe, dude's a beast. He goes so hard without mercy. Yep, that's true. I did all of those things straight time. You remember. I'm glad you haven't forgotten. Dang, you should check him out, but The Only Age of Napoleon, 11 large volumes from Mesopotamia to Napoleon. Yes, I've heard of him before. I should definitely read him. Are Cherokee Indians related to Iroquois? No, not necessarily. Lincoln wanted to keep the Union together. That was his main goal. At first, did Lincoln see any action in the Black Hawk War? No, but he was a colonel of reservists during that war. He wanted to keep the country together first and then free the slaves. He realized that only that he could do both at the same time. That's what the Emancipation Proclamation, the document highlighted in the background, is about. Were the Native Americans as tight as they are now back then? I don't know. Ulysses S. Grant kept the Union together. He helped Lincoln win the Civil War, that's for sure. Do you ever wonder if our elections are just an illusion of choice because at least 40, if not more, of our presidents are descendants of King John? That never bothers me. What party did John Wilkes Booth affiliate himself with? Well, back then, almost every Confederate leader, almost every Confederate resistance general, every Confederate statesman, every major leader in the South was a Democrat. The Democratic Party had been the party of the Confederacy. It would go on to be the party of the Ku Klux Klan and the KKK, they're the same thing, of segregation and Jim Crow. And of course, John Wilkes Booth was a disenfranchised Democrat, very upset with the loss of the Confederacy in the war, who decided to assassinate Lincoln with a bunch of co-conspirators. In fact, they actually planned to destroy the entire governmental structure. He had men targeting Vice President Andrew Johnson, Secretary of State William Seward, and of course, Ulysses S. Grant himself, who was supposed to be at the theater with Lincoln that night, but was out of town. Do you think the South could have won the Civil War? If Jackson had not died, I think it's very likely they could have. He's also a neo-Nazi. Yes, I am clearly a neo-Nazi. Are people calling me a Nazi already? The Mound Builders, were they all six-fingered giants told through Native American legends? No, but it is interesting that giants are a legend that you will find in almost every civilization in world history. Rumors of giants, space dwellers, alien visitors such as the Nephilim or the Anunnaki, the Chinese, the Native Americans, they all have legends of giants. Do you think Henry Clay, or think of the Cyclops in Greek philosophy and religion. Do you think Henry Clay or Daniel Webster did more for the United States? Clay, probably the most accomplished politician in American history. Did Grizzly Adams have a beard? Yes, he did. Trump speaks softly. Bro, you just discredited yourself. I'm not saying, no. 999. It's not the idea that Trump speaks softly or that Theodore Roosevelt speaks softly. The foreign policy of speak softly and carry a big stick basically has the idea that the U.S. needs to have a very strong military that's willing to do most of its work for it, but also is willing to work through negotiation and diplomacy. The speaking soft portion is the diplomacy. The big stick is your arsenal, your military, your Navy in particular, that can back you up whenever you need to. Was Eisenhower the last good, non-corrupt president? Ooh, no. Yeah, imagine actually being an American. It's crazy. There's like hundreds of millions of us. Have you been to Gettysburg? No, but I should go. Dwight Eisenhower owned a farm on Gettysburg that I want to go to after his presidency. The whole system is ran by secret societies. It's all a show and fake. Okay, well, whatever. How do you know about Polish involvement in the USA, like Koszyczko? I don't know enough about that, but I do know that that Polish immigrants, Polacks as they were often derisively called, immigrated heavily to the United States in the late 19th and early 20th century, part of the great wave of migration that saw millions of people from Eastern Europe come to the United States, many of them Jewish, and the Poles were a significant part of that, creating a large group of Polish people who formed neighborhoods in different areas of the large cities, just like the Irish and Italians had done before them. Biden fought against desegregation. He also said he has kind of a mixed record on civil rights. If we're looking at the entire story. But yes, it's true that Biden was a civil rights advocate. He also didn't want his kids going to integrated schools and racial jungles and stuff like this. This is actually stuff that he said. I mean, I just love this. We have to lionize someone or we have to absolutely hate them. History, no one can do history if they do either of those things. You have to look at somebody who they were based on their historical context, how much of a victim of time were they, and how much were they actually behind the ball. At the RNC or DNC, where does the trend come up to hold each state's vote card up in the air with its own flag? It comes from the 19th century when basically political conventions were where they nominated the candidates. There was no primary season. Primary season is a relatively recent invention. It used to be that different states would have a delegation and they would hold up their state so that everyone could see them, and then they would vote and choose in a series of ballots who would be their nominee, and whoever gained the attention of the delegates would become the nominee. It wasn't a primary or caucus election like it is now for Democrats and Republicans during the 19th century. And it was usually where they would select their vice president. So it's not like it is now. The process actually is still followed where the delegates vote for from the particular states who they think should be their nominee. But those votes are based completely on the primary and the popular vote count of that political party in that particular state. It was about industrialization, and the poor plantations didn't have money to repay the North. The poor plantations were not poor. Why is the USA the laughingstock of the world? It is. I guess it is. There's a lot of people who really don't like the way America's going, the ultranationalism. People have not liked America basically talking bigger than everybody else and talking louder than everybody else for a long time. The Cyclops was a metaphor about the ego. It could be, but it's also... I'm not saying that it's a real creature. I'm saying that it might have something to do with ancient legends about giants and magical creatures that seem to be in every single civilization's lexicon. Who is James Webb? Don't know. What is the Monroe Doctrine and how does that apply to imperialism? Theodore Roosevelt used the Monroe Doctrine, which basically says that the U.S., and you can go watch my video. Hars put the video on the Monroe Doctrine in the chat. But basically, the Monroe Doctrine is the idea that the United States, where it spoke for Latin America and said that none of these areas could be colonized by the Europeans anymore. It basically shut off the continents of the Americas from being colonized by the Europeans. Not to say that the Europeans didn't try their hand at either colonization or cultural influence and economic power in those areas afterwards, but it was the United States speaking for both continents for the first time in their history. And it was used by Theodore Roosevelt to justify the creation of Panama, the overthrow of the Colombian government in Panama, and the U.S. building the canal there. And of course, Trump has added another layer of it by basically saying we are going to intervene for what we think is best for the Latin American people. That's what the Don Roe Doctrine comes from. Jimmy Carter and Obama to some degree. Jackson Pollock? What about Jackson Pollock? But not bombing over 90 boats, not too many additional countries is not what I call speaking softly, nor would FDR. FDR didn't speak that softly when he was busy firebombing Tokyo, so I don't know if FDR... It's Theodore Roosevelt who had to speak softly and carry a big stick and caused a revolution in Panama to overthrow the government of Colombia. So it's not like he spoke... Speaking softly is the diplomatic negotiation tactic. It's the... this is the same man who won the Nobel Prize for effecting a peace between Russia and Japan. If you don't know who Sadso Kosciuszko is, you need to know. He was a key factor to the American Revolution, like the Battle of Saratoga, and he helped make the U.S. military. Okay. James Webb, make the James Webb Telescope. Friendly history. Seriously, you need to learn this stuff. I don't know everything. I know a lot, but I don't know everything. Who cares? It's crazy that I know more than you do, but yeah. I want you to get the video that I made recently on the Monroe Doctrine, where I explain it. I'm not wearing my smoking jacket. Sorry, David Matthew. But I do have this very nice tie. No smoking jacket for me today. We should create the UFO doctrine now. That'd be interesting. George Washington inspired what Frenchmen to stay in America and fight the British. Well, that'd be the Marquis de Lafayette. You also had General Rochambeau and the Comte de, I forget his name, but he was the naval commander who helped trap the British at Yorktown. You had a naval blockade trapping the British at Yorktown. You also had Washington coming from the north and Nathaniel Greene from the south. What is the point of asking what-if questions about past events when they never happened? They're fun. They're interesting. They help the subject come alive. I don't mind them that much. Yeah, get the smoking jacket. It might be too hot. How did the eagle go from a Nazi symbol to an American symbol? It was an American symbol before it was a Nazi symbol. The whole point of the eagle, and by the way, it has nothing to do with the Nazis. The ancient meaning of the eagle obviously goes back all the way to the Romans. An eagle was a representation of the god Jove or Jupiter, or their adaptation of the Greek god Zeus, the head of the gods. And this was usually carried by their standard bearer along with a flag, the SPQR, Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and the people of Rome, which was carried into battles against all of their different enemies throughout their centuries, and of course, well into the imperial period. The eagle then becomes a symbol of resurrecting the power of the Roman Empire, that the Byzantines would use the double eagle, and of course the Russians would too, the Germans use it as well, and it's used by the British and the Germans and the French interchangeably to kind of call back to their Roman roots, the fact that these nations were all colonized in one way or another by the Roman Empire. The Russians weren't, but they were heavily influenced by the Byzantines, who are the Eastern Roman Empire, who survived the fall of the West in 476 AD. So kind of as a tributary to their English and Rome and thereby Roman heritage, especially politically, the Americans used the eagle. So, and the Germans are using it as a callback to their own Germanic history, which includes the Holy Roman Empire, which is the First Reich, and the Second Reich, which is the German Empire that was destroyed at the end of the Great War. And then, of course, the Third Reich is the Nazis. So there you go. Yeah, we got a humble guy. I, too, am extraordinarily humble. Close. Battle of Brandywine. Well, the Battle of Brandywine is one of the many different battles in the war, but it's not. But what do you mean by Brandywine? Let me see. I know more than you do. Such a humble guy. Also, was telling you to know the key figures at the least. That's the basic thing we're supposed to know. Kosciuszko is not one of, I can't even pronounce his name, is not one of the key figures of the American Revolution. Sorry. He's important. And yes, James Webb was a good man, and the people trying to paint him as a bad man were dumb liberals. They wanted to have the name of the Webb telescope changed, but NASA said, nope, the name stays. Okay, I obviously haven't heard anything about this. Do you agree the British won the War of 1812? Yes, I do. A weird question. Who do you think is the ugliest American president and who is the most handsome? That's actually a good question. I like that. A question. I mean, Nixon and Kennedy probably are the most... Excuse me. Sorry, I have to sneeze. Okay. I have a sneeze button now, just like they used to have on the radio. They used to have a cough and sneeze button on the radio. But basically, I can just mute myself. I sneeze sometimes. I'm very raw, but I realize I need to get more professional as we go along. That's why formal wear. I will put on the smoking jacket in just a minute. Well, hopefully you are all liking and subscribing. But basically, Nixon and Kennedy gets a lot of attention during their presidential debates because he's the telegenic, good-looking one, and Nixon, who's just coming off of surgery and is also suffering from a cold, looks kind of pale and unpleasant. It's actually, I think, those two. I think Kennedy is the most handsome U.S. president. Franklin Pierce is another good candidate for that. Ronald Reagan's obviously very good-looking in his kind of telegenic way. Obama is another president who, more from his charisma, comes off as good-looking. Who's the most chopped U.S. president? I'd have to say Richard Nixon. And yes, I just used the word chopped U.S. president. I've seen memes about Romans being fine, losing entire legions, but losing the eagle standard was the end of the world. Quintilius Varus, where are my eagles? Cried Augustus when he wondered about the loss of a standard bearer and its desecration by the Germans after the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. One of the most devastating losses in Roman history, which basically ended any chance of Rome ever conquering the Germans. The British symbol is the lion or the bulldog. That's true. I'm not saying, but that doesn't mean they've never used the eagle, and the eagle has never represented them in some way, shape, or form, or been a callback to their Roman ancestry. Was the Spanish-American War justified, or was it more U.S.-American expansion? I don't know if it depends on your own definition of justified. American expansionism matches the expansionism of the Europeans at that way, and the Americans did it in kind of a mediocre, less impressive fashion than the British and the French did with their colonization of the late 19th century. So it's not like no one else was doing it. It also, of course, destroys the Spanish Empire. So it's not like they were going in and just abusing poor natives, although they do that in the Philippines. I think what's unjustified about it is the way they treat Emilio Aguinaldo in the Philippine War that follows their colonization, their defeat of the Spanish in 1898. I think getting rid of the Spanish Empire was a huge, huge plus at that point for many of those people. Do you at least know the American influence, the Roman senator in Cincinnatus? Yes, I've talked about the influence of Cincinnatus on Washington many times. The brave Roman senator and gentleman farmer who gave up his time to become a general and serve as a dictator temporarily in order to lead the military to defeat against barbarian invasions is definitely the template Washington follows in his entire political career. Why did President Lincoln stick with the incompetent General McClellan during the War of Northern Aggression? The War of Northern Aggression, I love how you use a buzzword. I love how there's so many terms that just pin it on Lincoln, the War of Northern Aggression or Mr. Lincoln's War, the war between the states. When you have a foreign nation that creates its own foreign government and thumbs its nose and sticks up the middle finger against the United States, the U.S. goes and kicks their butts, because that's what the U.S. does. If you ever want to be flag-waving and patriotic, be that about the Civil War. I find it strange that so many people who are patriotic about the United States also are gladly willing to wave a Confederate flag when the Confederacy was a rebel nation. I'm sorry, that's lost cause. I'm not going to buy into that lost cause myth nonsense. My first video ever that I did on this channel, one of the first videos I ever did on this channel, was the lost cause myth. The first time I ever decided to make a video for this channel, nearly 2 years ago now, and we're celebrating that coming up with President's Day, was about how the lost cause myth is a bunch of nonsense. But anyways, McClellan was an experienced general. He was young. Lincoln thought he was a good strategist and they would do a good job. McClellan turned on him on the battlefield, was not aggressive enough as certain, like after Antietam. And of course, he eventually ran against Lincoln in 1864. One of the most fascinating things in history to me is the evolution of the British system from absolute monarchy to what it is today. You go from an absolute to a constitutional to a ceremonial monarchy in the space of about 2.5 centuries. Do you think we'll get a fourth Reich? Is that kind of America? Is it true that America has never won a war alone? That's British nonsense. That's hairy nonsense. No, the United States won 3 wars in the 19th century alone on their own. And if you count the wars against the natives, they won more than that. Watergate shouldn't enjoy entirely Nixon's reputation or ranking, but to each their own. I think Nixon did some good things before Watergate. It's why I don't have him as an F-tier president when a lot of people do. JFK was indeed a great president, probably top 5. Just because you don't know Tadeusz Kościuszko doesn't mean they aren't a key figure. You have done zero research on this and you are just making a rational claim. He is very important. I'm sorry, somebody who studied this his entire life and barely knows his name probably means he's not as important as you think he is. Let me see. So, as a British person, I don't think we've ever used the eagle, but I could be wrong. I don't think it's the only. It's not a national symbol the way it is in the United States. You've got the bald eagle, which is obviously a callback to the Romans, but it is something that is understandably part of European. The history of European pageantry and power. A bit off topic, but I've been meaning to ask you, why are this Angles and Jutes not considered the same as Vikings? I always felt they were basically the same, from the same area, basically. Kind of, but they come and invade and take over England centuries before the Viking invasions start with Lindisfarne. But you could say they are proto-Vikings. But they settle. Vikings weren't always settlers. Why did America leave the Philippines after the Spanish-American War? It would have been useful to stay there. They did stay there. They conquered it. They squashed a rebellion led by Emilio Aguinaldo, and they maintained it as a colony for 50 years. I am not sure if you are familiar with Persian Constitutional Revolution of 1905, but I would suggest you look into it. I have heard about it before. Epimetheus does a great video on it. Hello, GK. Great to see you. Your answers are too long-winded and full of unnecessary BS, and it's putting you behind and making this drag. Okay, that's nice. What question did you actually have that was actually necessary? Why doesn't the U.S. get more criticism about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? They get plenty. As for its own collapse, look to the Aztecs, Mayas, Incas, the Philippines, we all down to Spain collapsing against itself. That's true. It was kind of a wheel of fate. Where did the bundle of sticks symbol come from? Why did the fascists adopt it? It meant strength. A bundle of sticks is harder to break, obviously, and it goes back to the ancient Romans. You're not perfect, friendly history. Yes, I'm not perfect. I know I'm not perfect. What else is next? Britain played a bigger part in winning World War II than America. Obviously, the Soviets did the most. Britain second, America third. No, without America, both sides neither would have won. And I don't know that without the Soviets, the Americans would have lost. And without the British, both sides could have won. We have never used the eagle, but we have used the raven and the lion. Okay, that's fair. How did ghettos work in Nazi Germany? They were segregated neighborhoods where usually Jews and other undesirable peoples, obviously the Warsaw Ghetto uprising in 1943 is one of the most famous examples of insurgency and the resistance against the Germans during that war. But they were basically these places where different people, particularly Jews and other persecuted minorities, would be forced to live in squalor and horrible conditions, basically as second or even third class citizens, and would often be places that were unclean, unsafe, and just kind of they'd be herded in there like cattle. In four-axis political spectrum, which I think is garbage, I am not sure if all the four axes have been tried. Okay, then? Yeah, that's probably true. Yes, they would have the war of Europe had turned massively before America. No. Maybe in the Great War, or if you mean by World War II, what I call World War II, because I think there's 3 world wars. I think the Nazis are World War III, the Great War is World War II, and World War I is the 7 Years' War. Going by that logic, then yeah, I can kind of see where you're coming from, but not against the Nazis. The British are not beating the Nazis on their own. Yes, they would have. If you aren't perfect, then don't act as if you are by saying someone who I don't know about can't be a key because I know everything. I said I don't know about him. I don't know. I've barely heard of him. He rings a couple of bells in my mind, but I haven't read a lot about him. That doesn't make, and he's probably not as key of a figure if you think he is. If you're talking about somebody who's been talking about this for decades, Germany losing at Moscow was huge. They didn't lose at Moscow. That's the Napoleonic Wars. They didn't get to Moscow in the last World War. How are the Philippines decolonized? The Americans basically kind of let them go at the end. They'd already been practicing self-government with them for some time. Has anarchy ever tried in history? Probably not. Have you ever had an anarchist phase in your life? I got close, but I'm not an anarchist. It's a stupid idea. I think, yeah, it's kind of an idealistic, like anarcho-capitalism is kind of I think the right-wing answer to the idealism of pure communism. I heard some guy I spoke to say that the Soviets could have defeated the Nazis even if they got to the Ural Mountains. No. Anyways, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. We're more than halfway through the live stream Q&A. We'll have another one tomorrow and then one on Monday, and then a live stream lecture about a particular topic on Sunday. So please make sure you get all your questions asked. I'm going to turn on the lighting. That'll probably help. Okay, and let's see. I'm going to put on the smoking jacket since everybody wants that for some reason. So give me just 1 second. I'll be right back. Think of topics, questions, or comments you want to bring up, and I'll be happy to address them in a moment. And hopefully you're all having a great time. Okay, we are back. I am in my smoking jacket. Give me a hot take in Nirdrish, you mean British history? So I've got my smoking jacket on. Tanya, great to see you. Tanya's a member, so is Harsh. They have the emojis. You can become a member too and get premium access and all of that stuff. So consider doing that. And that would help the channel. So anything you'd like to help the channel with would be awesome. It doesn't matter if you haven't heard of him. You can't say he isn't the key. If you don't know about him, you need to know of him to determine that. Your ignorance doesn't make him not key. He's not key. You're basically doing the meme of the guy playing the golf, and then there's the fat old guy smoking a cigar, and I'm the old fat guy smoking the cigar in this one. Hello, Horseshoe. Great to see you. A British history hot take. The British didn't need the American colonies. Why do you think the great men such as Cincinnatus or Marcus, and actually it's a good thing that they lost the 13 colonies because it allowed them to colonize the rest of the world. That might be more of a hot take for the Americans, but that is true. Why are you China, India, or why do you think that great men such as Cincinnatus and Marcus Aurelius raised terrible sons? This is a common problem, I think, that almost has more to do with psychology than it does with history, but I mean, you have all of these incredible things you do, and yet you struggle with the same problems in your own life. It's one of life's great ironies. you're obviously focused on so much that you may not be able to raise the proper sons. Commodus is a great example of that. And this is why monarchies, I think, end up failing, because at the end of the day, you just have this idea of, oh, someone is really good at doing something, so therefore his lineage must be good. You get this blue blood nonsense in your mind that their children must be better, superior genetically or mentally or psychologically than somebody else, and they end up not being that. That's why you get Commodus right after Marcus Aurelius. I think one of the reasons democracy prevails is because of meritocracy. Monarchy doesn't prevail because people eventually figure it out that just because somebody is related to somebody who's really good at doing something doesn't mean they're really good at doing that themselves. So, crazy guy we have here. That's why you support a racist president, Woodrow Wilson. Yes, that's ad hominem, which is what losers do. So good job. Apparently, the crew of Top Gear got chased out of Argentina back in the day. The beef between Britain and Argentina so fascinated me. Well, that's mainly the Falkland Islands, and that's been a simmering beef for 200 years. So they needed India, but not American colonies. So like easily, the United States might never have been born. Well, I don't think they needed to hold on to it. I think letting it go allowed them to colonize significant portions of Africa and Australia. It brought their focus elsewhere. It allowed them to not expend money there, which would have been a bigger drag. It would have been very interesting to see the 13 colonies as part of the British sphere during the Napoleonic Wars. I'll say it, and there wouldn't have been Napoleonic Wars because there wouldn't have been a French Revolution. The way the world history would have changed if America did not become a country in the 1770s and 80s is just phenomenal to think about. How France wouldn't have had their revolution probably. The British probably would have continued, would probably have focused on expanding across the continent. There wouldn't have been the colonization of Africa the way that the British and the French ended up doing it. I'll say it again. Political parties only provide democracy for monetary lobbyists. It's almost like we need a political organization to find unity. We've had it in the past. We should set up a debate. I'd debate you. Well, a debate on Discord would be fun, but yeah. What role does the British monarchy play today in relation with the House of Lords and Commons? I don't know as much about this as other people on the channel do, but they speak, they give speeches, they'll open sessions of Parliament, they can make policy recommendations, endorse certain policies. It's very much ceremonial and much more for morale than it is for political or social power, Roman. Anyways, other questions about history or social studies. Time flies when you're having fun. We're already more than 2/3 of the way through the Q&A, most likely, assuming we ended in an hour, which we usually don't. We usually go way over because there's just so many people asking so many questions. But I'm all caught up to the chat, so please drop your questions, comments, or topics into the chat, and I will be happy to answer them. And thank you for liking and subscribing. Get us as far... we're trying to get to 20,000 subscribers this year. That would be really, really wonderful. Is it safe to say that the colonies didn't have usage for them, so they let it go strategically? Yes, at that point, it's pretty much the case. They were investing way too much and losing way too much by continuing to fight in the colonies than they could have gotten by just letting them go. Why do China and India not like each other? Obviously, the huge divide between Indian Hindus and Muslims in Pakistan is a huge reason why, or China. You asked about China. China's seizing of Tibet in the 1960s obviously is a huge problem for that. Throughout their history, they haven't always gotten along. You've had two empires, and when you have two empires that are next to each other, like the Mughal and the Qing, you have a lot of suspicion. It's just very common when you have empires that are that close. Yeah. But Tibet is the modern reason for why the CCP is so hated in India. India has gone the nationalist route, and China kind of has it in its own way, so that's created tension and problems between the two of them. So, other questions about history or social sciences? Okay, let's talk about that period of history. During King George III, how did the Prime Minister of UK would have chosen back then? What's it like today? I don't know. I think it was. I don't think it was based on direct election the way it is now. Back then, franchise, the ability to vote, belonged mainly to landowners and people in what were considered the landed gentry. So franchise wasn't as easily and readily available to everyone as it is today. I don't know about the current laws about British franchise, but they're similar to the Americans in some ways, from my understanding, where you have people who are able to vote who live in the area, so who are in the country. You don't have popular elections the way you do now. But you do have the parties selecting their prime minister, similar to how the U.S. House of Representatives selects its Speaker of the House. The prime minister is much more like the Speaker of the House than he is like the president, although he has executive functioning power, political power that the Speaker of the House does not in the United States. Why was Hindustan broken into 3 countries? What makes Bangladesh different from India? Large Muslim populations. What was China governing system prior to communism having CCP? It was a nationalist, kind of a splintered nationalist country after the fall of the last emperor in the Qing dynasty in 1911. Why did the Spanish refuse to give up on the Netherlands despite it bankrupting them? It was a Catholic versus Protestant religious war combined with the political and economic interests of the Habsburgs in controlling the Austrian and Spanish Netherlands, which are different. The Austrian Netherlands becomes the basis for what becomes Belgium. It's the southern part of the Netherlands at that time. So you've got that issue. And boy, I've got a weird halo thing coming in. Let me see. Okay, that's not going to fix it. Okay, that's better. So, yeah. They think that it's better for them to actually get more of the land in the area, and the Habsburgs want to punish the Protestants in that area. So there's religious connotations. There's a lot of economic and political opportunities. A lot of these cities in what becomes the independent Netherlands are very wealthy. They have a lot of resources. They're cultural and artistic centers, and you can see this by the Dutch Golden Age, which lasts throughout the 1600s, during and after them throwing off the yoke of the Spanish. Let me see. What is your favorite type of cookie? Do you dunk it in milk? Yes, my favorite type of cookie is either peanut butter or Oreos, and yes, I do dip them in milk. Let me see here. Why the Muslims in India have entered, but not the Sikhs? Sikhs? I don't know what you mean by that. By how much do you think the Soviets needed Allied aid? I don't know that they survive without Lend-Lease basically being continual fortuitous, unrequited, basically gifts given to them by the United States and even the British. Why British Empire didn't want to colonize the West Coast, but U.S. wanted to. The U.S. had the idea of manifest destiny. The British were far more concerned with long-scale wars with the Spanish. The Spanish were still a particularly strong empire. By the time the U.S. started to colonize these areas, they were owned by Mexico. The Spanish were gone. The British didn't want long-term fights with the Spanish over that land when the Spanish were still pretty powerful. Could the Emancipation Proclamation be considered an act of constitutional improvisation rather than constitutional fidelity? It is both. It is an improvision that is also totally harmonious with the Constitution, which secures, I think it's the Fifth Amendment or the Sixth Amendment, that secures life, liberty, and property, which obviously the life and liberty of the African American slaves have been encroached upon for far too long. My friend Ali told me that Mamdani is a spy for Iran. It's just nonsense. Yeah, manifest destiny is a major reason for American colonization, and has a lot more to do with the U.S. being interested in westward expansion than the British were. Now, the British aren't disinterested in it, but it's far more difficult for them with a very active and powerful Spanish Empire at the time. Anyways, other questions about history or social sciences? Who do you think is the most important historical figure? The most important historical figure, my favorite is Napoleon, but important and best and and favorite are all different categories and different things. The most important historical figure, without a question, is Jesus. And it's not a religious take. It has nothing to do with religion. I don't share my religious views. People have guessed about them. You can continue to guess about them. I don't share them. This has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with the validity or veracity of even the Bible itself. But it's obvious that Jesus of Nazareth, who is an extremely well-documented historical figure, so don't give me that he didn't exist nonsense. The ancient sources are pretty good on showing that he did exist, especially for a backwoods carpenter and rabbi from a Roman province who wouldn't have been able to read or write Greek or Latin himself. Jesus certainly seems to have existed, and his impact is just astronomical. Anyways, can you talk about why did Southeast Asia not unify into one country like China did? Indochina was the united French colony, but because they all kind of have their own independence movements from the French in their own different ways and kind of adopt their own communist governments at different times, they don't unify into one country. Can you talk about Great Awakening in U.S.? What caused it? The the Great Awakening is an English phenomenon that spreads to English colonies in America through preachers like George Whitefield and, of course, Jonathan Edwards, the preacher from New England. And it's basically this idea of promoting individual salvation, a reaffirmation of religious principles that had been eroding after the puritanical starts, especially in New England of the American colonies, and basically as a reaffirmation of Christianity, but in a much more individualistic faith that also kind of influences religious liberty and the founding of the country itself. How many offspring did President John Tyler sire, both legitimate and illegitimate? At least legitimate, 12. 3 from his first, 9 from his second. One of his grandsons just recently died. That's how long that line goes. How do you explain that King Constantine II created Jesus Council Nicaea 921? I explained that by saying that's a complete historical fiction. You're thinking of Emperor Constantine the Great, who legalized Christianity, which already believed in Jesus long before and had been persecuted for their belief in Jesus long before Constantine was even alive, let alone in power. But through the Edict of Milan, after his victory at the Milvian Bridge, Constantine legalizes Christianity. He's obviously heavily influenced by the church and seems to have undergone some sort of conversion himself, either then or later in life, being baptized right before he dies in the 330s. And in 325, he calls together the Council of Nicaea to settle a Christological debate about the divinity of Jesus between the Nicene traditional Orthodox Christianity and Arian Christianity, which believed that Jesus was the first created being by God the Father. Now, I'm not going to get into all the theological discourse about it. That was as theological as I ever get on the channel. But for the historical importance, it was significant for Constantine to make sure his country was united, his empire was united, and not religiously divided, especially after he had just given clemency to the Christians. He wanted the Christian church to be united on the same front, and he overwhelmingly decided to adopt the idea that Jesus was indeed a God, and of course, gods are eternal, so it had been an eternal God, and they reaffirmed what seems to be, they thought to be the teaching of the New Testament and of the church up to that point. So good try, Jean-Jacques. But if Jesus is real, how come he was born before his mother? So I am talking about Jesus of Nazareth, the historical figure. If you want to believe that he is a pre-existent spiritual being that was God the Son, as the Christians call him, then you can believe that. I'm talking about Jesus of Nazareth, who is a carpenter, who emerges claiming himself as a rabbi and claims himself with his followers who claim the same thing, that he is indeed God in human flesh, that he is the Son of God, which means he is God, and he is the Jewish deliverer or Messiah. He is eventually killed for this claim by the Jewish religious leaders under the direction of the Romans. And then his followers claim that he rises from the dead, and based off of that, spread Christianity all throughout the Roman Empire at the height of the Pax Romana, when it is very easy to spread ideas and teachings throughout the Roman world. So this is what separates, obviously, this is what is the basis of the Christian religion. This is what Tacitus the historian and Josephus both claim happened. Josephus himself seems to have also claimed that Jesus rose from the dead. So despite being a Jew, he seems to embrace this Christian teaching, despite the fact that he's also a Roman patron. He's patroned by the Romans, working and writing a history of the Jewish people for the Roman Emperor Vespasian. So, good evening, Wild. Great to see you. Why are we deleting Jean-Jacques? And yes, so the idea is that I'm talking about the human person. I'm not talking about any idea of Jesus pre-existing his mother. I think the Christians would probably say that Jesus, as God the Son, pre-existed his mother and created his mother, but is obviously the human is born from that woman, Mary. Why did the Chinese wars and conflict always last longer, have tripled the deaths, and took place over a vast area of land than the rest of the world? First off, China's huge. Second of all, China has had a large population for a very, very long time. And third, you have these interdynastic periods, intermediate periods in ancient Egypt, and you have them in ancient and medieval China. Between them, you have like the Three Kingdoms period. You have the I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of the other one. There's two major ones. One's between between different empires. One is between the Han and the Sui dynasty. I think that's Three Kingdoms. Warring States, that's another period where you basically have eventually the end of this period by a particularly powerful figure. Wen Di is a great example of this, and of course so is Qin Shi Huang or Shi Huangdi, the first great emperor of China under the Qing dynasty. These are examples of Chinese emperors who take the initiative and are able to end these periods. Thank you for listening from Western Kentucky, James. It's great to have you here. If Alexander the Great was able to leave a clear heir, do you believe the empire would have splintered? He had a son. It splintered anyways. I don't know that a clear heir would have worked. He didn't have children old enough to assert their power. The United States of America has a history similar to Roman Empire. There are some parallels. Yes, that's because the government and political structure and is Roman. The legal code is completely Roman. Why was Christianity illegal? It was heavily persecuted by the Romans during its first few centuries because usually the Christians were seen as cannibals because they ate and drank the blood of Christ through the communion. They also were not very compliant with the Roman government, which would often demand that they at least acknowledge Caesar as Lord and Master when they only acknowledged Christ as their master. History after. Who do we pander to for a scholarly mustache? You want me to get a scholarly mustache? I've had a mustache before. I always hate the way they come out and end up shaving them. How are modern Mongolia-China relations? Don't know exactly. You are a historian. I would like to know your opinion on the Night Museum movie franchise. They're fun. They're not good. They're not accurate, but they're fun. I like movies about history, even if they're inaccurate, like The Patriot, Braveheart, The Gladiator, because they at least introduce you to the topic and get you interested in these figures, and then people like me can cash in on them by talking more about them. So I should probably do some reaction or historical analysis of these movies. That would be fun. A film review based on the historical inaccuracies would be fun, like Braveheart and the fact that they didn't have kilts in the 12th century and 13th century and 14th century. And history is indeed alive. And let me see. People are very stupid. Why are we deleting everything Jean is saying? I actually kind of like some of what he's saying. And why are we timing him out? Can we end that? Can we not time him out right now? What World's Fair you been to? None. Is justice possible in a world where free will is uncertain? I guess. Can you do the cha-cha slide right now? Cha-cha real smooth? No. And Logic, it's great to see you again. Favorite Bohemian mustache and why? Bohemian. My favorite mustache ever from a historical figure is Józef Pilsudski, which is an awesome name too. He's the Field Marshal of Poland. I don't know if I have his picture here, but he has like the coolest mustache. Maybe I'll use him as my background tomorrow just to show you how awesome I think this guy's stash is. Shout out, of course, to Chester Arthur and his amazing sideburns, the American president. But Józef Pilsudski was a Polish general who became the leader of an independent Poland, beat off the Bolshevik army, and kept Poland independent until his death. Would have been interesting to see him try to deal with Hitler in the late 30s. But just this rabid Polish nationalist with just an awesome mustache. And I'm not seeing anything. But the guy is really, really cool. One of my favorite historical figures. One of the more underrated historical figures with, again, the greatest stash in history. And I just don't think it's close once you see it. But yeah, I can't seem to find it. Alexander II of Russia is also a good candidate for that. Please go check out Field Marshal Józef Pilsudski. Bohemia. I don't know about a Bohemian mustache off the top of my head. I really don't. Like a Czechoslovak mustache. I'm cheating, but I'd say Franz Josef I, but he's not. He's an Austrian, but he was the ruler of Czechoslovakia. Your favorite Bohemian? Oh, monarch. Sorry. Favorite Bohemian king. Ooh. Again, I'm gonna cheat and say it's a Holy Roman Emperor. I'm gonna say it's my favorite Holy Roman Emperor, who is or Austrian Emperor, which is Franz Josef I, and he does rule over the Bohemians or the Czechs. So, can you explain Columbine? Columbine is one of the first major. It was a high school, one of the first major school shootings in American history. I think 20 children died. I'm trying to remember where it was. I think it was in Colorado. Why did the United States make and focus on making the best military equipment ever in human history in the 1990s and 2000s? Kind of a carryover effect from the victory over the Soviets, the guns and butter economic argument. Basically, the United States felt that it could continue to maximize the best military products to show off how economically viable it was. It was good business. And actually, that is good business during during a time of peace. Why is there so little science and mathematics developed in Africa and South America in the past? India, China, and Arabs all had math and chemistry in antiquity. You don't have a consolidating metropolitan empire with the ability to develop technological, economic, and social revolutions, which often lead to mass amounts of learning. So you don't have the Romans, you don't have the Abbasid Caliphate and the Islamic Golden Age, you don't have the cosmopolitan metropolitan art movements of different empires like the British or the French or even the Americans to some extent. You don't have that as much in Africa and in South America. You don't have that unified place. In fact, Pax Britannica, Pax Americana, Pax Romana allowed for the development of arts and culture with diverse input from different areas in places like Africa and things like that. I think that's one of the reasons you don't have as much of an imperial hegemony that it kind of allows for that. What is it about Napoleon that makes him your favorite? Hars, put the video on Napoleon. I just love the military. I think that's kind of the height. I think Napoleon, I think it's kind of the height of military genius of the 18th century meeting a new military powerhouse of the 19th century. I think Napoleon is one of the most important liminal figures in human history. I think he's a walking contradiction of I want to continue the revolution, and yet I must have central power in order to do that. I think he triggers all of the nationalist and liberal movements of the 19th century that end up creating the modern European states of places like Italy and Germany. And of course, the brilliant military tactics that he employs. It's quite fascinating. Is he a religious figure, this man who put the Pope on house arrest? Is he a liberal? Well, he also crowned himself emperor. Is he this amazing loving connection with Josephine? They were often at odds with one another. Who is Napoleon? There's a lot to him as a person that I find fascinating. And of course, you also have to just admire his sheer out brilliance and bravery on the battlefield, the chutzpah this man had at Austerlitz, for instance. And a lot of people get down on him for the invasion of Russia. I will go to my grave believing that Napoleon was justified in his invasion of Russia. I know it's a huge hot take, but Napoleon had every reason to invade Russia. Alexander I had betrayed Toussaint and had sided with the English. And in order to keep Prussia and Austria in line, Napoleon felt that that was the only thing that he could do. And the Grande Armée won at Borodino, and it looked like they were going to win. And then the Russians set fire to Moscow. So, big historical hot take. I do him a lot on this channel, but Napoleon had every reason to attack Russia. And actually, his invasion looked like it was a success until he underestimated the Russians' ability to just set fire to things, scorched earth, and of course, burning their own capital. What was Native American lifestyle like in the Americas prior to European arrival? Peaceful tranquility is overrated in understanding them. They were very itinerant. Some of them had some sort of semblance of being united in one nation. They had proper understandings of nature and hunting patterns to not deplete the buffalo and bison population. This is common with the Sioux, for instance. Their lifestyles, many of them, like I said, were itinerant, although some of them had consolidated their tribes into various nations, like the Algonquin or the Iroquois. There's various different parts of them, like every other civilization, trade, warfare, conquest, colonization, and settlement. There was just a lot less understanding of what we would call a civilized nation with borders and cities, except when you get into Central and Mesoamerica and the Olmecs, Toltecs, Zapotecs, Mayans, Aztecs, and all of those folks, and Incas. Has the United States played a significant role in provoking conflict with Russia? Yes. When? Is it an accurate claim to say that democracy is a Western thing? Yes. It's Greek, and it percolates down to the rest of the Western world. So is republicanism. How scandalous was Bela IV of Hungary arranged marriage of his son to a Turkic Cuman queen in the Middle Ages? Probably pretty scandalous because of the divide between religions, but I don't know a huge amount about it. Let me see. Mexicans call mustache brocha, Spanish for bush. Brush. That's kind of cool. Brocha. Why not what? Do you think Britain planted democracy in India? Yeah. Sure. Napoleon is peak France. I love you too, random friendly neighborhood historian, and you can become a friendly neighborhood historian too if you haven't already by liking and subscribing. If you want to become an official one, you can become a member. No pressure whatsoever to donate to the channel, but all the money we need that we get helps, and we need it, and we use it for better technology and all of that great stuff. The idea that Africa didn't have technological cultural development is a colonial lie meant to justify civilizing them. They had masses of manuscripts, advanced astronomy, and math. That's true. And maybe the best example of this is the Mali Empire in Timbuktu. You see the accumulation of wealth and all of the learning and scholarship of Timbuktu, and you've got a great example of it. We don't see them on such a wide scale as the Europeans, probably because you don't have as much cosmopolitan development. But with Central and South America, I can see your argument a little bit more clearly. Much platonic love all around. Thank you. Will you also die on the hill that two racist presidents, Polk and Wilson, weren't that bad? I'll die on the hill that Polk wasn't that bad. I think Wilson's highly overrated. I'm sorry, Hars, but you're going to run into so many problems if you actually encounter scholarship on this. And I've encountered the scholarship. I don't always agree with it. But the scholarship is, Polk is great. Wilson is great. Shut up and get over it. And the scholarship is wrong on so many things, but there is a place for the scholarship in understanding history. Is it true? I'm a pop historian, but I'm also a academic historian. I am both. I'm not one or the other. We need both. Haiti and the Dominican Republic are on the same island. Why is Haiti so worse compared to the Dominican Republic? Different forms of government. I don't know exactly why, to be honest with you, but I would say different forms of government, different levels of corruption in those governments. You have a Duvalier dictatorship of father and son, which really, really messes up Haiti in the late 20th century. Is it true history buffs have early onset Republican? Oh, that's the, who is it, Shane Gillis joke? I'm not going to speak to that. I don't share my political views. You can guess. Let me see. What was the closest that the Dixie Boys came to having a chance at winning the War of Northern Aggression? Did they ever have a legit chance? It's not the War of Northern Aggression. I think they had a legit chance. I think they had some big victories, especially. But the way the West was divided in the blockade of the South, they had to win that. They had a puncher's chance, but not a great one. A history teacher I know who said that socialism, like Venezuela and Cuba, aren't real forms of socialism, and that socialism is mainly in developed countries. He used the example of who plows snowy roads. That's the old argument of if you like firefighters, you're a socialist. I think that's nonsense. Do you like the idea of the Republic? Of Plato's Republic? Absolutely. Start thinking of your Halloween 2026 costume idea. I don't know. Do you agree? I don't agree. I wish for Iran to have a secular republic one day. Why didn't the U.S. keep Cuba after the Spanish-American War? The ostensible reason for starting the war was to liberate Cuba. You can't really make that argument that you can colonize and liberate it. You would betray the humanitarian reasons why you joined the war if you would just simply let Cuba become part of your empire. So in order to seem more moralistic than they really were, annexing Hawaii and crushing Emilio Aguinaldo in the East Indies, in the West Indies, they decided to let Cuba go. If I'm going to hate a president, I feel like Andrew Johnson is easy money here. It's hard to find someone who didn't hate that guy. Yeah, Andrew Johnson is easily hateable and pretty much for pretty clear reasons. There's nothing that's going to redeem him anytime soon. Thank you so much. I appreciate the follow, Dax. If patriots are in control, who is spraying our skies daily still? I don't know what you mean by that. What right does America have to Greenland? None. What right do the Danes to Greenland? It's not you see, I love this. I'm an American, so therefore I agree with everything America is doing and everything the president's doing, and I have to answer for that. I just love that nonsense, that notion. The United States doesn't have any claim to Greenland. The United States occupied Greenland during the last World War to keep the Danes from allowing the Germans to use it as a launching point for an invasion. Strategic acquisition is part of American history. And if you don't know that, you don't know American history, because American history has always been acquisitive. It's only been since the Cold War that the United States has said we won't be acquisitive because we want to have the moral high ground over the Soviets, who have been acquisitive. But they said, well, we can be acquisitive through influence and economic and political power. The United States isn't going to take Greenland. In fact, the recent deal that Trump seems to be getting what he wants with is not getting Greenland, but having a sphere of influence in Greenland that will allow the United States to determine policy in the Arctic Circle. Now, is this a good thing or a bad thing is up to the politicians to debate. But it is a form of neo-imperialism. I don't think it's a form of classical imperialism where the United States just takes over Greenland. The United States was never going to invade Greenland. That was a stupid idea, and even Trump ruled that out. So who do you think is the single best and worst president in U.S. history, and why? I can't judge recent presidents. The worst president in U.S. history, James Buchanan, I think takes the cake because he basically allowed the Civil War to happen. The best is Lincoln. So you have the best and the worst right next to each other. Andrew Jackson's pretty bad. Andrew Johnson gave us Alaska. That is one quality that I think puts him above Buchanan, but no one thought it was a good idea at the time. And if I'm going to say that what Napoleon does in Russia looks good on paper, then I have to say what Andrew Johnson does in Alaska looks stupid on paper. But it actually turns out to be not a folly, but a great success. After this year, he will either dress up as King George or Jane Polk, either or. Okay. Punic Wars are interesting. What do you think makes that event so important? It's the way the Romans go from a backwards city-state to being the most powerful force in the Mediterranean. And you can't have the Roman Empire, you can't have the Caesars, you can't have any of basically any of Western European history without the Romans first crushing the Carthaginians. Seward's Folly was a huge success. True. Let me see. We're well over an hour, by the way. I've never seen the movie 300. We're at 68 minutes. How about President Carter? I think Jimmy Carter is definitely on the list as one of the worst presidents in U.S. history. And I'll be fair and say George W. Bush is too, so you have a Republican and a Democrat in the modern time. Yeah, Rodolfo, it is Friday. Happy Friday to you. It was incredibly inaccurate. I mean, it's like fun, but it's like incredibly inaccurate. Braveheart, Patriot, those are more accurate, but still pretty loosey goosey. Gladiator's pretty inaccurate, but I love these movies. Schindler's List is probably the most powerful historical movie, but not accurate either. The Nazis were not all a bunch of loons like Ralph Fiennes. Ralph Fiennes is a great actor. The Nazis, a lot of them were very, very deliberate in their agency, not just insane. Is Drumpf a secret society member? Your answer will be quite telling. I love how you're putting me to the test on this. Is Trump a secret society member? I don't know if he's a member of any secret society. I think he knows very well who these secret societies are. He obviously knew where they were. Look at his connection with Epstein. Maybe. Can you explain why the firefighters are socialists and the system is wrong? Maybe so I can explain it to the guy. Because it's this nonsense. The libertarians say the same nonsense, by the way. This isn't just a left-wing virtue. This is a right-wing virtue, too, or at least whatever libertarians are. But it's this idea that just because you have the government doing anything is socialism, that means that every economic and political system is socialism except for anarchism. And that's just not, that's colloquially, traditionally, historically, culturally insignificant and stupid. Having the government do something for you is not socialism. Having the government control something for you is socialism, if you want a one-liner. Socialism is the idea that the government should redistribute wealth, nationalize businesses and industries, create an extremely progressive tax-based system, and almost basically seize the means of production, not going as far as Marx with the abolishment of public property, but as Lenin said, socialism's real end goal is communism. And socialists and communists did not see themselves as different until 1920, by the way. Communism was a form of socialism. Socialists of the 19th and 20th century were very much interested in the idea of communism, and Marx and Lenin saw themselves as socialists. So there's socialism is a system that believes in economic, and it's funny because socialism sounds social, and Marxism started off as an economic system, but Marxism is far more cultural, whereas socialism is far more economic in that it believes in the control of a means of not the means of production, but of the nationalization of industries, the government running running or heavily regulating different aspects of the economy, then basically paying for all of this through a welfare state, or some form of that. And a lot of the times this can lead to basically a command or planned economy. A socialist economy is at least heavily mixed. Having firefighters that are paid for by taxes does not necessarily mean a mixed economy unless you want to go with an extreme technicality. So if you want to do the extreme technicality thing, then you could say, yeah, they're right, but that is stretching technicality to a crazy extenuating definition. How effective was Morgan's raid as a battle strategy? Don't know enough about it. Shouldn't socialism be spoken by its main founders? I don't know. Who do you think the main founders of socialism are? Carter comes off as weak due to the Iran hostage crisis. It was learned later that Republicans sabotaged negotiations to boost their POTUS chances. It worked, of course. Reagan won. Reagan was going to win regardless of the Iran hostage crisis. Do you think that Jimmy Carter screwed up just that? Carter also took the Shah out of power. How's that working for Iran? Iran becomes one of the biggest enemies of the United States overnight, and Jimmy Carter does nothing to stop this. I mean, it's pretty obvious that Jimmy Carter is the first president who really shows that the United States knows nothing about what to do in the Middle East. And George W. Bush and Barack Obama follow this up with even worse actions. The idea that you can just be nice and people will follow your example in the Middle East is crazy. It shows a total lack of the West's ability to comprehend the delicate imposition of the Middle East, the delicate balance between Sunni and Shia, and the way that radical Islam has revived itself over the last century and has no goal but the destruction of the West and Israel in its mind. So TC, I'm sorry, but Jimmy Carter was already going to be a bad president even before that. Yes, he negotiates the peace between Israel and Egypt, and that is probably one of his lone successes. I don't think that James Buchanan has a lone success, but Johnson and Carter do. Would you say Baby Bush a bad president? Absolutely. Iraq, Afghanistan, bad ideas. History's about ideas. Those are bad ideas. And that's the neoconservative answer to Jimmy Carter's neoliberalism, where it's basically like, by force, we will show these places that democracy really works in places that it has never been tried before, and nobody seems interested in having it. If you define socialism as the government does something, then yeah, that's socialism, but that's not what socialism is defined as historically or classically. It is not the way the economic system works or something like that. Why do you think no one has ever claimed to be Jesus who has risen and gained following? Plenty of people have claimed to be the Messiah. Jesus claims to be the Messiah. Was Jefferson Davis an effective president? Look at what happened to the South. Britain shaped the rules. America later inherited them. That's true. Do you know how to bake or cook? I know how to cook. I bake less, but I know how to do both. I mean, the Shah of Iran is also becoming very dictatorial in how he ruled. I really don't think Jimmy Carter's fault for how he ran his country. It went from bad to worse, and Carter did nothing to stop it. It would have been better for the U.S. in all of its own interests to let the Shah stay in power. It would have been better in the geopolitical sense, in the midst of a Cold War, to let the Shah stay in power because you risk them becoming a communist country with all of their oil and resources. And it would have been better to let the Shah stay in power because you risk the rise of radical Islam, which is detrimentally opposed to the West. Yeah, so why did Jimmy the Peanut former Carter give back the Panama Canal? That's another problem. Carter believed it was right to give it to the Panamanian people, and basically this idea of self-governing autonomy, even though the United States had created the nation of Panama just to build the canal. They shouldn't have done that because the amount of civilians killed skyrocketed, which caused the number of Taliban to skyrocket. This is true. Oil was a mess under Carter. You could only buy gasoline on odd or even days. Well, I mean, is police department owned privately or publicly? It's owned publicly, but something being owned publicly does not make something socialistic. Yeah, Iraq was a total disaster. And Harry's here to tell us why the Americans are bad. So anyways, it's double personality. If someone claims to be the Messiah. Yeah, it could be. I mean, he's not the Messiah. He's a very bad boy, though. Anyways, so we're at 75 minutes in. I've been answering all of your questions. I don't know enough about the Chagos Islands. I don't really care. I don't know. When did the UK give him up? Catchy. I feel like you don't give the Confederate States enough credit. They could have won if they had British or German backing. They weren't going to get it. Well, I think that when many people discuss socialism, they mean social safety nets and free standardized services. It's become a colloquialism for that in many discussions. Yes, having social security is not socialistic. I mean, it might be a little bit, but it's not doesn't make something socialist. So friendly history, Venezuela and Cuba are socialists. That history teacher guy is wrong. Yes, he is wrong. How can Europe get out of its economic mess without war with Russia? War is not as good for the economy as you think. Logical, by your definition, isn't the police socialist, isn't the fire department socialist, isn't just about anything the government does socialist. Yeah. Yeah, and people who are not socialists agree that there are things that should be run by the government. I mean, libertarians think this. They don't think the military should be private. So what is the truth about the Great Switch? That's the idea that the political parties in the United States changed overnight because of the passage of the Civil Rights Act. The Democrats basically almost immediately became Republicans, and the Republicans almost immediately became Democrats. This is a nonsensical, probably I'm exaggerating the position, but this is totally nonsensical, that basically Nixon and Reagan then used the Southern strategy to turn Southerners who were just as racist as ever against the Democrats and embrace the Republican Party by preaching to them about states' rights and individual responsibility and things Republicans love to talk about. This did work effectively, but it seems that but these states remain pretty reliably Democratic, or at least highly competitive in presidential elections until the 1980s. It was really Reagan's rampant success in the 80s, at least from a political standpoint. Whatever you think of Reagan, he does have rampant political success in the 80s. You can't argue with that. That allows them, that actually sees them become solidly Republican. And even after that, there's some swaying and moving. It's really the 80s to the 2000s when the South becomes significantly more Republican, well after the end of the Civil Rights Movement, at least its main movement, and also with Southern Democrats already dying out in huge numbers, many of them, except Strom Thurmond, remaining Democrats. Is the whole COVID thing planned by a great power? Probably not. The original Cassius Clay from Kentucky had the Russian Empire guarantee the Union's safety from Italian, German, British imperialism. Communists in Russia at the time were all about a slave rebellion. No, Alexander II, who was not a communist, who was the emperor, supported the Union because he had emancipated the serfs. This also ties into having a retributive system of justice. Yeah, public services should be run by a government, all of that paid for via taxes, but it will be free at the point for the use. Okay, how could Carter possibly prevent 1979 revolution? By backing up the Shah. Carter never backed up the Shah the way he could have properly done so. Even I think that the U.S. would have been probably better served if the Shah had not fallen. rather than this idea of Carter worshiping the idol of self-determination. He probably would have been better intervening to support the Shah's government. That didn't happen. That didn't work. In order to make up for what happened to Mohammad Mossadegh, Carter basically just let the Shah fall out of power and then gave him asylum in the United States, which has done nothing to help the people of Iran. Now, it is very true that people suffered horribly under the Shah. I am not saying that the dictatorships of the Middle East are good. But if you actually look at it politically and geopolitically and over the long-term effects, almost every single country in the Middle East was better served when someone like Muammar Gaddafi, the Shah of Iran, or Saddam Hussein was in charge than the absolute chaos and mess of ISIS, the Iranian Revolution, and all the other craziness. You want to know why there's a Libyan refugee crisis and why these people are in boats going to Italy? It's because of the fall of Muammar Gaddafi. These guys are not good guys. There's nothing likable about them necessarily. But one thing is clear. The chaos and profound divide and collapse of these areas geopolitically was caused by the United States and its allies basically thinking they knew what was best and speaking up because white people, or at least Europeans and Americans, know better about politics than the Middle Easterners do. They should have just left these areas alone, except actually in the case of Iran, where they probably should have intervened to help out an ally to the United States. So it actually would have been, the U.S. has done a lot of damage in the Middle East and a lot of damage to its own international reputation by basically thinking it knows best. But in that case, it probably did. It's just Jimmy Carter didn't know best. The Shah created his own mess in the late 70s. He set up a secret police. He cracked down on the dissent within the country. He threw religions to the wall in a religious country, like he was making a mess himself. And unless Carter forced him to reverse all of this, which he never would have agreed to, that revolution was going to happen. Yes, but it didn't have to be successful. It really, really didn't, Harry. You are incorrect. Let me see here. Why did we hide YouTube's tech support? He just comes on and always says stuff. Just leave him alone. So, anyways, what would America look like if William Jennings Bryan's ideas took hold? Interesting. Bimetallism? I just don't know that the silver standard would have ever worked. I think the U.S. was pinned to the gold standard. It had allowed the rich to become rich. I don't know. Would there have been a Federal Reserve? Would there have been a Great Depression? It's hard to say. Name a non-white majority former colony that is successful. Non-white majority, Singapore. There you go. Qatar. Or I don't know if Qatar was colonized, but Singapore certainly was. I'm not incorrect. You think that they should have intervened, restored the Shah for another revolution to happen a couple of years later. I don't know if another revolution would have happened. I don't know. I think the Shah should have been able to stay in power. And I think the U.S. actually would have been better off if the Shah had been able to stay in power. And so would the British, by the way. It's not like the British are benefiting from the Islamic Revolution. I think racist leaders are good. I never said racist leaders are good. And then another one, and then another one, just every time the U.S. will intervene to do what they do. Yes, because the British have never tried to stop anyone from revolting, ever. The British have never intervened in revolutions. I don't think it would have kept happening. I think there was a lot of discontent over the Shah, but I think Jimmy Carter should have backed him up. I think you had a U.S. ally who fell, and then everything went to hell in a handbasket in that area. And again, I'm not saying that any of these people are good people. I am saying that that situation was geopolitically more advantageous for the U.S. interest at the time in the historical context of both the Cold War and the U.S. problems with radical Islam, which became more rampant and apparent after that than it was if there had been a change. And again, every single time the U.S. has had a crisis in the Middle East, it has done the wrong thing. Lack of intervention, then intervention in other places. Iraq, Afghanistan, all of these places were better off before than they are now. You said Polk the racist is good. You didn't say that. You did say that, pal. I said Polk is a good president. Andrew Jackson is considered a good president. He was racist. George Washington was racist. Lincoln was racist. Every one of these presidents was racist by our standard. How are you defining racist? These are good presidents. They were racist. Theodore Roosevelt said, I don't believe that every good Indian, the only good Indian is a dead Indian, but I'm pretty close. Okay? So Theodore Roosevelt, one of the greatest presidents in American history, racist. Yes, they are racist. Of course they are racist. Most of the early American presidents owned slaves. That doesn't make Washington a bad president. All facts were conspiracy theories. That's not true. His big reforms in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s were very good for his country. By the late 70s, he was going nuts. So, should he have been thrown out of... So is the Islamic Revolution really better for Iran than the Shah? Would it have been better for the Shah of Iran to be overthrown by the Islamic Revolution, which hated the British, hated the West, hated the Americans? And by the way, the British are one of the reasons they hated the West so much. Is that really better than the Shah? I don't think so. I really, really don't think so, especially from a Western perspective. You're only thinking about the perspective of the Iranians themselves. And the Iranians themselves don't seem to really like that because they've got a dictatorship now combined with Islamic theocracy. At least back then, they only had the dictatorship part of it. And that was even not always the case. And Romeo, I give a crap because I'm a historian and this is my history channel. It's not better for Iran. The people of Iran don't seem to think so. The people who fled Iran in the 1970s and 80s certainly don't seem to think so. I know people who are Iranian, Persian, they call themselves, who were dancing in the streets when Jimmy Carter died. Every American was mourning the loss of this great man. And yes, Jimmy Carter is a great man. He wasn't a great president. I'm sorry. He screwed up so many different things. But I think we can all basically agree Jimmy Carter was a great humanitarian and fought hard for peace, freedom, and civil rights throughout the world and deserves a lot of credit for that. This isn't just bash Jimmy Carter Day. I like Jimmy Carter, at least as a person. But as a president, he's a man who never should have touched the Oval Office. I think the same thing about George W. Bush. Nice guy, never should have been president. It's that simple, folks. It really is that simple. I think that Gerald Ford should have gotten another term, and he would have handled that situation much better than Carter would have. I think Ford deserves his own term. Is that crazy to think? I'm not talking about politics. It's not about Republican or Democrat. I actually think Gerald Ford did some things that were actually pretty successful at the time, especially economically. It's Nixon that ruined Gerald Ford, not Gerald Ford. And Gerald Ford falling down a ladder, falling down the steps of Air Force One. Not like that impacts presidents who fall asleep all the time in press conferences nowadays and somehow get reelected, but okay. Was Pakistan complicit in hiding bin Laden? Probably. But yeah, anyways, the whole point is, it was better for Iran, but I'm just saying you can't really blame Jimmy Carter. Yes, I can. Jimmy Carter could have kept the Shah in power. So I can blame Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter just said, well, let them do whatever they want. And you know what? That was a mistake. For once, that was actually the wrong thing to do. Then let Trump take out Iran. I'm not saying Trump should or shouldn't do. I'm not making a political point now. I'm making a political point from 50 years ago that if we just learned the darn lessons of history, we would actually say, you know what? This might not be a good idea. Or this might be a good idea. I don't know. I think that it's just too much of a powder keg. And every single time the U.S. has overthrown someone, it has led to problems. Or allowed someone to be overthrown, it has led to problems. The Shah, Saddam, and the and you threw out the Taliban. That was good. Guess who you replaced them with? The Taliban. Great job, guys. Yeah. You agree that 1979 was really the Shah's fault. No, I do not agree that it was the Shah's fault. Bad leaders stay in power for a long time, and revolutions don't always topple them. And yes, I mean, can you blame Gaddafi for the 2011? Yeah, I guess in a way you could say it's his fault. Yeah, he mistreated his people. I'm not saying the Shah was a great guy. I'm saying he should have stayed. I'm saying that it would have been better for the West if he had stayed in power. Is that crazy? No, because it's totally 100% accurate. Everything I just said. I agree the Shah was way better in terms of not attacking the West. Yes. And I'm not saying that but I'm saying, and I also think that generally speaking, it's a case of bad to worse. He was better for the Iranian people. Look at pictures of Iran in the 1950s. Look at the women. I mean, this is the country that throws gay people off of buildings. This is the country that has sworn destruction to the United States and Israel. I don't remember the Shah ever doing that. Let me see here. Isn't the Federal Reserve a private entity? How did it come about? Jekyll Island, which sounds about right, or more like Hyde Island. We should call it Mr. Hyde Island. Created in 1913 by Woodrow Wilson. It is a private banking system that helps monitor the nation's currency. What country do you think has the best odds versus U.S.? China. Let me see. Yes. So, all wars have been banker wars, in the Fed, in the IRS. Have fun with that. Who was the best president in your opinion? Lincoln. That's why I have Lincoln up here today. We're looking at the Emancipation Proclamation. Did I hear something recently in the news about the Shah's son? He wants to go back to power. I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if we're going anywhere with that, but yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I agree. Jimmy Carter, great human, terrible president. Never should have been president. He's a Sunday school teacher. And I think Jimmy Carter basically took this idea that if I act like a good Christian Southern boy, then everybody in the world who wants to kill me will treat me nicely. And I think that's foolishness. I think Jimmy Carter got played. I think George W. Bush got played. I think Barack Obama got played. I think the Middle East is a totally different entity, and I don't think that the Middle East would have been this way had the British and the French not divided it up the way they were. So, by the way, Harry, you might want to blame the Shah, but you could also blame the British for doing what they did with Mohammad Mossadegh and everything else. Would you rather have lived as a peasant in Enver Hoxha's Albania or Kim Jong-un's North Korea? I'll take my chances in Albania. Let me see here. I think it's pretty amazing that Jimmy Carter's legacy was positively cemented for his work after his presidency. Considering the fact that his work during his presidency was absolutely terrible, or generally pretty terrible, then yeah. Biden was the best president. I'm sorry. I don't share my politics. I don't like to get into it, but I don't know who can actually believe that Joe Biden was the best U.S. president. Just like I don't know who could believe Trump is the best U.S. president. Is India successful? Far more so than it used to be. It's sort of good for U.S. here, though, because some people of Iran fled that they came to my city and made the flower district. Oh yeah, the Persians are an incredible people. I love Persian and Iranian history. I love talking about the Safavid Empire. I love talking about the Shah. And not the Shah as in the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who is somehow evil, beyond evil in this chat. But if you look at the term Shah, it is the most ancient term. Persia had the fourth monotheistic religion of the world, Zoroastrianism. And then the Muslims made sure that went kind of underground. So there's that too. Did something happen recently with the son of a Shah? Did you hear about this? He wants to go back to power. You have another outbreak. I told everybody it's going to be like the Green Revolution of '09. The Iranian government will crack down on it and it won't come to fruition. And for all of those of you in the chat who think Israel runs everything, Israel's not doing a very good job at overthrowing the government of Iran right now, so I guess that's not going to happen either. But then again, I was wrong about Venezuela, and I said, yeah, that was going to happen. Then Maduro was thrown out of power. Yeah, well, John Limbird is wrong. I'm sorry, just because you went through a traumatic incident and you had a horrible thing happen to you, and yes, that does make you a little bit of an expert on the topic at hand, but that doesn't mean you can be wrong. You can't be wrong. You are incorrect. That's basically Afghanistan. We're going to intervene to keep a government in place, then we're going to keep our forces there for years to make sure the government stays in place until we get pissed off and bored and decide to leave later, and then the government collapses anyway, and we have wasted trillions and trillions of dollars. It is not Afghanistan. Because you weren't overthrowing a government. You were maintaining a government that was already established. Manuel Noriega is a better, closer example of that. That is who the U.S. overthrew in 1990 on drug trafficking. The Bush administration went after him. After the Reagan administration, it kept him in power because he was an anti-communist, because that was Cold War policy in Latin America. And by the way, Iran and Panama are totally different countries. Anything is better than Islam? No, anything is better than radical Islam. The Shah is a Muslim. His family is Muslim. Most of the people of Iran are Muslim. God bless them. Salam to them. But it's radical Islam that seems to make Muslims suffer the most. And if you don't believe me, look at the victims of ISIS, Boko Haram, and all these groups. They're Muslims. They kill Christians and Jews, but they also kill Muslims. So, do you think Trump had good actions but don't at the same time explain that to me? I'm not going to talk about Trump's actions. I've talked enough about politics today. The United States did not create Cuba's current problems. No, but but an embargo has not helped. Why not trade arms for hostages? It's cool if Reagan does it. Yeah, that's fair. That's kind of Reagan's MO. Well, I agree, Shah was way better than Ayatollah, but some people ask why 1979 revolution happened despite Shah's oppression. Well, it happened because of it. Yes, of course. A revolution happened. And the irony is that a major revolution of that scale has not broken out against a much worse regime of the Ayatollahs. That's because it has become far more of a police state, far more authoritarian than the Shah's government was. And that's because the left of Iran was crushed by the Ayatollah. He used them and then destroyed them. And the Soviet Union was just as pissed off at him as the United States was. You know about Count Saint-Germain? I've heard about him. I've probably forgotten. I agree with Lincoln, FDR number 2. No, FDR, I get why you like FDR. FDR is overrated. Theodore Roosevelt has a much better case for being a top 5 president. I get why people love FDR. I really do. I do not. Watch my live stream lecture and my video on Franklin Roosevelt. I do give him his due. I think Roosevelt did a lot of great things. I don't think he's a top 5 president. I struggle with him even being in the top 10, to be honest. Every country is against Iran, but they are based people. I don't see Iran, what they do right now, being based, especially as a Westerner. Maybe I'm just too Western. I hate the son of the Shah. He haven't worked a day in his life, and he wants to liberate us. Well, yeah. Do you hate him as much as you hate Khomeini USA tax dollars well spent on son of Shah. That's true. How would you compare Biden to Trump? I'm not going to get into them personally. It's almost too close in history for me to make value judgments about their presidencies. I think Trump is more successful, at least at being president, because he's been elected twice, and Biden was only elected once, and then his own party threw him out on his ear, which is crazy because Trump would never see that. So you are a historian. I am indeed. Biden was hands down the worst and most criminal president in U.S. history. Yeah, well, thank you for revealing your politics, Just Rasher. I happen to disagree because A, it's too soon to judge that, and B, I think that Johnson, Buchanan, Carter, Bush, Bush Jr., Nixon, all deserve consideration before you think of Joe Biden. King Cyrus is a great leader. Yep, another great Shah. Which country actually did the coup? It was the U.S. I know you don't want to hear that, but it was Britain advocated for it. The British demanded that we do it. And to think the British were not involved is nonsense. The British were the ones who were worried about BP and the nationalization of the oil industry. The U.S. wouldn't have done it had the British not asked them to. Was Mary Todd Lincoln put on trial for something? I think I remember. Yeah, I've heard about that. I think it might have been petty theft. I don't remember. At the risk of the Alex Jones Jew thing, the Shah who wants to return to power knows he has to play the game and do what Israel says. The Shah, the guy who wants to be the Shah, has actually said he wants what's called the Cyrus Accords. He wants the Abraham Accords to be the Cyrus Accords, and he wants Iran to recognize Israel, which would totally blow up Hamas and Hezbollah, no pun intended. The Israelis already have done that enough. It would change geopolitics in the Middle East forever. If that actually were to successfully happen, geopolitics in the Middle East would never be the same. And I don't know about you, but geopolitics in the Middle East never being the same again actually seems like kind of a good thing to me. I'm going to catch up to the chat and then wind it up. We went way over because I love answering your questions. Would love to hear your opinion on the rise and collapse of Chinese urbanization. I don't know about the collapse of it, but basically building megacities where you have people living in small spaces in huge numbers is something that the Chinese have done for a long time, and the People's Republic have done it, especially since the industrialization of the Great Leap Forward, and then later on with the technocracy that they built in the 1970s and onwards. Israel's not planning to overthrow the government. They have another plan, if my theory is correct. Yeah, the Baha'i are in Israel, not Iran, their birthplace. Interesting. It's not right for Trump to say British forces were a waste of time. Are you talking about in Greenland where they sent one soldier? That's kind of sad. Let me see. Liberal democracy is cringe. I'm too much of a liberal myself to say that. Islam is radical. Read the Quran, Surah, and Hadith. You've got plenty of Muslims who read the Bible. I hate to be a whataboutus, but you've got plenty of Muslims, Christians, and Jews who don't literally follow every single thing in their holy book. But you have way too many Muslims in the Middle East who are willing to follow every single thing in the Middle East. Yeah. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. Thank you for quoting the Bible. I don't know why you did, but thank you. That would have been gone. We would have been intervened to restore the prior government and then left late anyways because we got fed up of staying there like we did in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, like we do with. And yes, I am perfectly aware the British, UK has a big role in these wars, but so did the U.S. And if history serves me correctly, it was the U.S. who instigated all four of them via NATO channels. And if history serves me correctly, the U.S. is the only country to ever trigger Article 5, but yet Europe is the one that's really just being sugar babies for America. Well, that's because America created NATO. America saved Europe out of 2 world wars. So I think the United States kind of gets to call the shots there. But if you want to go, mano y mano about this whole America-British chauvinism thing, to say that the British have never tried to intervene and overthrow other governments for their own sake is absolutely insanity and wicked nonsense, because the British spent all of the 19th century doing what you are complaining the Americans did in the 20th. They spent literally 2 centuries, the 18th and the 19th, saying we get to determine what other countries do all the time. And then the Americans said, well, we'd like to do that. And now you're saying, well, that's not okay. But the British did it for so long and in so many ways. In Africa, in multiple continents, and in fact, actually directly colonized them. The Americans didn't do that as much. And if you think that's a problem, look at how much Gandhi and Mandela fought to end that, and all the other people like Kwame Nkrumah, the Mau Mau, on and on, violently and non-violently. People were sick and tired of it. So to say triggering Article 5 doesn't carry the woo factor that you think it does. It doesn't make me flinch. It doesn't make me scared. Yes, I'm very well aware that the Americans triggered these wars and went about these wars. I'm not an American apologist. You're a British apologist. I like a lot of the things about American history. I like a lot of the things about British history. But I'm going to criticize America when I think it does something wrong historically. I'm going to do the same thing for the Brits. But this acting like this historical hypocrisy of, well, America's done all of this and the British haven't. Well, look at what the British did in the 19th century before you talk about what America did in the 20th, because I think you're going historically out of order. And there's the French Revolution video. I don't know why we put that in them, but there it is. Well, Iran has a civil society. I don't think we can liberate Iran anytime soon, but I do believe that eventually Iran will be liberated. Well, you were telling me a couple weeks ago you thought they would be, but yeah. And the U.S. president seems to think that Europeans don't really do much in war, and that apparently Europeans just sit back and didn't do anything in Afghanistan and Iraq. Apparently our troops just sat in bases, not really doing much. Only the Americans really did anything. Well, I'm sure the one guy you guys sent to Greenland recently did a lot. I'm sorry, but that's just too funny to me. Then how do you interfere with the politics of foreign nations to align them with your own goals without long-term consequences? You can't. But consequences can be good and consequences can be bad. We often use consequences in a negative, like if you misbehave in class, there will be consequences, is what something your parents might have told you. But consequences are just results. Well, two things can be true at the same time. Khomeini is a murderer who believes in theocracy, worst type of government. Son of a Shah hasn't even worked in McDonald's and he can't do anything. True. So maybe there's a third alternative, or maybe who knows? Maybe the Shah's a great leader. I don't know. Free Iran. Free Iran from who? I'm going to say the exact same thing I say about when the Israeli people, when we get the Pali people in here who are like, free Palestine. Free Palestine from who? Free Iran from who? Iranians are fighting for their freedom and giving meaning to freedom, but be the voice of Iranian people so that they are not killed by the government. Yeah, okay. I'm not the voice of anyone but the voices of history that call out from me from long ago. How could Congress think the Clintons would know anything about a sex scandal? Yeah, because the Clintons know a lot about those. What stopped the U.S. president saying British troops stayed off the front lines, even though 400 of our troops died in Afghanistan, thousands incurred life-changing injuries? I don't care. Stop holding me accountable for what the president of my country says. I don't hold you accountable for every dumb thing Keir Starmer does, and he does plenty of dumb things. But I don't hold me accountable for the dumb stuff my president does. It's not my job for you to just rant endlessly as my moderator, who should be encouraging and pushing the channel, about, oh, America does this bad, and America does this bad, and Trump says this bad, and Vance says this bad, and this is bad, and this is bad, and this is bad. I don't really care. I'm not an apologist for them. I'm not an American apologist. My job is to talk about history, social studies in as objective a manner as I can and discuss geopolitical situations. And from every geopolitical framework that you look at it, the fall of Iran was a major loss for the United States in 1979. And I don't think anyone here can really safely argue that, no matter what you think of a Shah. And I think that it's also a pretty fair moral judgment to say that the Shah was better than what the Ayatollah has been for the Iranian people on the net. That doesn't make him a good person. So yeah, spring of 2026, friendly history. Watch out, I'm gonna be like Andrew Jackson to the channel. Do what you want. I don't say the UK has never intervened. Where did I say that? I'm saying that to say that the Americans intervened and you don't like it and they did a bad job and things were destabilized and the British helped them is crazy when you look at the British history as just one intervention after another starting in 1600. Nixon defended the Shah, and I agree with Nixon. We need the Shah. He gives the people choice and freedom. He didn't give them that much choice and freedom, but I think he's a better alternative. Who knows what kind of alternative there could be in Iranians' future now. Remember, there were liberals who wanted a liberal democracy and not communism, who were taken advantage of by Khomeini, and eventually most of them were killed or exiled. The third option, secular republic or no, not Shah or Ayatollah, real democracy. I don't know if democracy will work in Iran. I don't know if democracy can work anywhere in the Middle East. Well, the one British soldier is doing more for Greenland than your country is at the minute. Oh, burn, savage, wow, incredible. I really don't care, wow. I just think it's hilarious that you send one soldier to protect a giant island that isn't even going to be invaded. I just think it's a show of bluster and nonsense. But yeah, and I think it, just like Trump's actions probably are a show of bluster and nonsense. I'm not a Trump apologist. I'm not an American apologist. I'm a history apologist. And I'm going to talk about history. I'm going to talk about the problems of our world through that lens. How can 56,000 people say they own the whole of Greenland? I can understand some sovereignty, but not whole. What if 1,000 Chinese lived in Antarctica? Can they claim all of it? No, but Greenland has an established history of being semi-autonomous, and they don't own it. The Danes own it. So it'd be one thing if Trump was going after a completely sovereignly independent Greenland, but he is not. Greenland is not independent. It is owned by the Danes. The Americans have tried to buy it before. Trump is not acting completely out of line with historical patterns for this area of the world where the U.S. has wanted to swallow up Greenland. But he is acting pretty erratically, even by the standards of American imperialism. Look, compare him to presidents like Theodore Roosevelt. If JFK wasn't assassinated, would he have escalated the Vietnam War like LBJ? Now you know the reason why he was assassinated. The answer is no. Reagan didn't make Iran any better. That's true. What the British Empire did in the 1800s is totally separate from what the U.S. does after it set up the UN and other institutions. No, after it set up those institutions. So it was set up by the United States, which, by the way, backs up my idea that international law means nothing without the United States. So yes, the British Empire. So we can't judge the British Empire at all in the 19th century, but we can judge the American Empire in the 20th century. Fascinating. The historical character who I love so much is Dr. Mossadegh. He was way better than all of these bad leaders we were talking about. Yeah, he was an interesting guy. I like him a lot. You know that isn't the point, or do you seriously think Britain sent one soldier to protect that island all by itself? No, I think the British are just saying, if you attack Greenland, then that's an act of war against us, because we have this one soldier here who's just basically a muppet for us. We have a history of democracy from 1905 until 1953, with the exception of Reza Shah era. We had constitutional monarchy. I don't know that that might work. I don't know if a constitutional republic would work. It's making a point because Britain doesn't actually plan on invading anyone anytime soon, unlike the U.S. The U.S. doesn't plan on invading anyone anytime soon either. You are not paying attention, but thank you for that. I believe the constitutionalists who gave us democracy in 1905, and people like Mossadegh, are sacred. Okay, if President Kennedy hadn't been killed, there would have been no civil rights bill. I don't know about that. Which political party did Lincoln belong to for most of his career before becoming a Republican? He was a Whig, like many of the people who were anti-slavery but didn't know exactly how to elucidate their ideas. And then, along with some disenfranchised Northern Democrats, they formed the Republican Party in Kenosha, Wisconsin in 1854. Go watch my video on the formation of the two parties. I've gone 104 minutes when I said I would only go 60, but I hope you all enjoyed it. Harry, what are you talking about with Greenland? The United States sees... Okay, now Harry and Hars are arguing. Yeah, we've reached that point. Let me see. Well, if Carter supported the Shah, wouldn't the 1970s just happen later? I don't know. Reagan was certainly in support of the Shah. Reagan wanted the Shah back in power. Even if the Iranian government is toppled, the religion problem will prevent the new puppet government from reaching peace. Probably. I don't know. I just don't know. It's a lot easier to uphold a government that's already in power than to topple an old one. And you should learn that from history. It would have been a lot easier for the United States to protect the Shah than it would have been for them to overthrow the Taliban. They did the second one stupidly and the first one unwisely, and did not do the first one rather unwisely. Wasn't the United Kingdom that threatened a treaty NATO ally to gain ownership of an island? You know, I don't care about the Greenland thing. I've already addressed it. I've already talked about it. Why do you care so much? Why are you obsessed with this? The United States has done more to divide NATO in the past year than any European country has in the past 10. The United States created NATO. It's kind of, I hate to say this, but it's kind of like, I don't want to play with this train set. I want to blow up this train set now kind of thing by a child. And yes, it's childish, but I mean, why does it bother you so much? Yeah. I think constitutional monarchy is better for Iran, but since our royal family betrayed constitution, that opinion may not make sense. Okay, I've talked enough about Iran. I'm tired of talking about Iran. Whatever. I don't care. I've talked about the Shah. I've discussed why the Shah falling was bad for Iran, bad for the West, and I've discussed why historically that made the United States, that was the first step towards the United States screwing up. And it's all because somebody asked me who is the worst president, and I said Jimmy Carter has a case to be made because of what he did in Iran. And then everybody was like, well, that's not really his fault. And I'm like, yeah, it really is his fault. He could have kept them in power, and they would have been a lot better off with the Shah than otherwise. Yeah. So. Let me see. Well, then how do we fix Iran? I don't know how to fix Iran. I just don't. I'm not answering geopolitical questions. I'm not giving solutions to geopolitical problems. I am saying what history teaches us. NATO was a British idea, not American one. Who created NATO? Who wrote the charter? Who came up with it? It's really an American idea. He imposed tariffs on 8 European countries because he wants to own his island for national security reasons, which everyone has already proven to be BS. Does it really matter? Harry, why do you think that talking to an American gives you the right to just continually attack the U.S. president, thinking that I actually care when I do a history podcast or live stream about the American president? I don't care. I talk about Trump only in context of historical matters. I don't care what's happening with Greenland. I really, really don't. I think it's an interesting thing. I talk about it in a limited capacity. But why are you so obsessed with this? Why are you more obsessed with Donald Trump than any person I've ever met who wears the stupid red hat? Let me see. On a platform of more power, control, and influence, nothing weird, nothing really bad there. You're acting as if he was a Nazi. Well, the Nazis put themselves on blast like Trump does, so careful there. How come people are less and less happy every decade things are improved technologically? People have less meaning, and they aren't subscribed to my channel. There's a bunch of reasons why. Is America overall good or bad? Historically speaking, if we're talking about moral judgments about America's influence in the world, I think beating the Nazis gives the United States a moral high ground that it has eroded but has not been fully lost. I think the U.S. has been overall a net good for the world than a net bad. Net is different than gross. There's plenty of gross bad by the United States and plenty of gross good by the United States. I think the gross good just so happens to outweigh the gross bad, which is why we call it a net good. But good question, Hicksta. Rams or Seahawks? Seahawks. Kennedy probably has a high IQ. Trump refused to rule out military force to take an island owned by a treaty all for weeks. That isn't normal. That isn't true. 2 days ago, he said he's not going to use military force. He actually did say he's not going to use military force, so you are incorrect. Yeah. Nationalism emerging sovereign nations. Yes, this happens all the time, especially when a sovereign nation starts to struggle. Had to be a modern president like Reagan or... I don't know what you mean. Who is the smartest president? Oh, that's a great question, Kelsey. It's Jefferson, Lincoln, Madison, maybe even Nixon. Bill Clinton is extraordinarily emotionally intelligent. That's why he's so charming. But he's also a very, very shrewd politician. So don't underestimate Bill Clinton, despite all of the jokes about him. Barack Obama is very intelligent. Gerald Ford was very smart. Yeah, those are a few that come to mind. But I think you got to give it up to the first 5 presidents and their brilliance of founding this nation. Yeah. Would you be a good U.S. president? Absolutely not. Look at how divisive I am. Look at how much people don't want to listen to me because I talk common sense. Millard Fillmore was not a smart American president, but good joke. You made me happy. Let me see here. Let me see. Who is the dumbest U.S. president? Well, if you ask Harry, it's Trump. Trump is the answer to all things about U.S. presidents. Worst U.S. president, stupidest, ugliest, Trump, because apparently people in Britain are obsessed with Trump just in a negative way. The dumbest American president, probably James Buchanan. Why did Saddam betray the West? He was given weapons to fight Iran for the West. That's true. Right after the United States bought weapons from Iran to fight the Sandinistas. It's so crazy how the United States foreign policy was in the 20th century. Oh, geez, the humidor, crazy. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. Why did he betray the West? He never cared for the West. He didn't ask for it. The West did it to undermine the Ayatollah. So it was just kind of, okay, but I still don't like you. Same thing with Osama. Okay, please like and subscribe. Yeah, Harry is crazy because Harry is obsessed with an American president that I'm not even talking about because I'm talking about other things, and it's all this, but TDS is just insanity. And yes, and you are also crazy for calling me disingenuous earlier when I was being no such thing. Thank you for joining the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where my moderators tend to be the people I argue and debate with the most because they don't know what moderators are supposed to do. I don't understand. Yeah. So, anyways, I hope everybody has a really great Friday. Go out and impress your friends and maybe the love of your life with the history knowledge that I've given you. Take care, and I'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern for more Q&A and all the great stuff that we normally do. So you wanted to say your ignorance makes you perfect. No, I'm saying that I know a lot about history, and just because I don't know someone probably means they're not that significant of a historical figure. No offense. But I'm always willing to learn about more people, so I guess I have to look up Kozuziak or whatever his name was. Anyways, I hope everybody has a great start to their weekend, and we will see you again tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern for more history and social studies, and hopefully my moderators are better behaved. Tadzuz, Kozic, whatever. Okay. And yes, great Shatner's ghost. Okay. Take care. Have a great evening. And as always, love history. Bye-bye now. And like and subscribe on your way out.